Hello and welcome to the Be Formless, Flow-Driven CEO and VC podcast, where we are reshaping life, leadership, business, and investing from the inside out. And today I am welcoming all the way from Belgium, where it's roughly around 11 a.m. in the morning, Luc Dochez. Welcome to the show, Luc.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Thank you. And I hear the sun, you said the sun's shining. It's a beautiful day in Belgium. I have been to Belgium before and I do find it a beautiful city. So it's great that the sun is shining.
It's not always the case in Belgium, although I try to claim otherwise, but that would be a lie. And, we're very lucky that we have a couple of sunny days. We're typically known to be quite rainy, but, let's take benefit of this great day out there.
Yeah, it always makes a difference. I think it always kind of changes your energy and your outlook on the day ahead. And, we're going to get into that a little bit, when we talk about founders and entrepreneurs and life as in that way. And firstly, though, I want to introduce and share a little bit about you, because you do have quite the career and quite the story and quite the journey in terms of your success, but also how you've shaped and reshaped it and ultimately what you're doing now. Luc, you're the managing partner at Droia Ventures, which is a specialist life science venture firm investing in breakthrough therapies for oncology and genetic diseases. And oncology is close to my heart because I have had quite a few cancer family and friends obviously dealing with it past and present. So I am really thrilled that is something that you're doing in terms of breakthrough therapies. Your path into venture is deeply embedded in building. So before moving into investing, Luc, you spent over 2 decades as a biotech operator. And that included serving as the CEO of Tusk Therapeutics, which was acquired by Roche. And you were the chief business officer of Presenza. I got that right, didn't I? I got it right this time?
Yes, you got it right this time.
Acquired by BioMarin. And that experience shaped how you show up in venture today, because at Droia, you operate not just as an investor, but also as a company builder, working closely with founders to translate complex science into viable therapies that can ultimately reach patients, so making a difference for the patients. The firm takes a hands-on approach, supporting companies from creation through clinical proof of concept, with a focus on solving diseases that have historically been out of reach. And I'd really love to dig into that once we get through this, in terms of, because historically there have been so many, diseases that have been out of reach, and be keen to understand, are we getting closer to a lot of these diseases and finding a cure? And your work, Luc, it sits at the intersection of science, conscious capital, and impact, where decisions are not just financial, they're also human. And I think human is a really big part of the world we're in right now as well, and we need more of it. Your lens reflects a shift from control to stewardship, from scaling companies to enabling outcomes that matter at a patient level. When we caught up the other week, though, I absolutely love this call out that you made. Underlying it all is a deeper transition, and that's from leading as a CEO to supporting as an investor and a board member. And you mentioned the shift describing as moving from parent to grandparent, learning how to guide without taking over, and how to balance intuition, responsibility, and long-term impact. I'm going to hand it over to you to tell us a little bit about your journey. Over to you, Luc.
That's a kind introduction and a very long introduction, and it also makes you reflect on a few things. So indeed, I would also just add to that, next to this business journey, I'm still happily married after 26 years. I got 3 kids, which are, I always say jokingly, almost off my payroll. I'm not sure that's ever going to be true, but at least they're almost, or they just got out of college or are in their senior years at college. So
you said 3, didn't you? 3 kids.
Yes, three. I got a son and then twin girls. My son is 25 and then twin girls of 23. So they're getting they're getting there, and it's nice also to see them prosper. And like I said, the comparison, I'm hopefully one day I'll be a granddad. In real life, luckily, I'm not a granddad yet. I think that would have been a bit too early and a bit of a shock to me. It would really make me feel old. But business-wise, I think the transition indeed is a bit the case. As a CEO or CBO, you have one company, you take care about, it's 24/7, it's your everything. And, but you have also, moments where everything is quiet and you can kind of relax for a moment, and you have, I'm not going to say you have control of everything, but at least, you're in charge and you can do things. Moving into the venture side, being a director on many boards, I think I currently hold about 11 directorships across 11 companies on different boards, and it really feels a bit different. It feels like you can give advice, you can tell, your CEO, your management, what you think is a good way. You also only get kind of input from time to time and mostly not direct about it. And so you have to trust, you have to kind of believe that the people are ready to do the right thing and that they can kind of move it forward. And so it's a completely different role, a completely different feeling. What do I like most? I'm not 100% sure of that, to be honest. It's probably something hybrid, maybe not all in every day, 24/7, but also, I think at this moment, sometimes I feel a bit remote, from the operations, from being in the field, from really kind of, sensing what is happening out there. And now you kind of have to spread your attention over many, many different things.
Yes.
And it kind of, it's different. It's also exciting. It's different. I think most importantly is, you're still doing this because you hopefully can kind of contribute to new medicines that help patients. And that's what gets me out of bed. Even on a rainy day, I get out of bed. And a sunny day, it's easier, as you said. But even on a rainy day, because you're working on something that hopefully will help. Even if it is one patient at a time, it's fine with me. I think this is what is really motivating.
I love that. And you talked about the feeling. Like, what's you mentioned it. Like from I guess I've got quite a few questions even just listening to you then. But you said from parent to grandparent, and it's a different feeling. What does that feeling feel like? What is that feeling?
But I think, as I said, you take a bit of a distance. You have to find a balance between giving your advice, but also giving enough freedom to management, to the companies to go their own way. So it's a question of trust, a question of letting things loose and kind of, somewhat hoping for the best. And unfortunately, from time to time, you do get a call then, and certainly when troubles are popping up, and then you have to see how much can I step in, how much do I want to step in, and also at what moment do I have to take a hard decision, which could sometimes even mean replacing management, and which is something we all dislike, we don't like to do, but sometimes it's just necessary, as not everybody is cut out to be a CEO of a biotech company. So that's a completely different position, different feeling. If you're CEO at the end of the day, it's a bit more lonely because your board wants to hear good news and your team wants to hear good news, and so ultimately everybody looks at you to make a decision, which is fun on the one hand because you control a bit the destiny of where you want to go, but on the other hand, it kind of comes down with also a lot of questions and not always a great sparring partner. And so it's hard to find a great sparring partner. And I think that experience also helps me now as a board member, as a director, to kind of try to be that sparring partner and not just the investor on the board, but somebody who's really willing to mentor people, really willing to kind of give them advice. And then it's all obviously, then also people have to be willing to take advice. That's another debate as well.
Yeah, I've been having quite the conversation around decision fatigue at the moment in terms of, a lot of leaders, like it's almost like not everyone, I shouldn't say everyone, but there's this sense that there's this, fight or flight mode and, unable to make decisions because of the overwhelm. And we're obviously in a huge revolution right now. And as a leader, there's a lot of decisions needing to be made. There's a lot of changes happening within the organization. From people through to like you're working in breakthrough, from biotech breakthrough therapies in terms of like oncology and genetic diseases and solving diseases, for the future generation. Are you seeing that there is an element of just, more than ever in, the companies that you're investing in and the founders that you're working in? Are you seeing that there's more decision fatigue? Is there more unrest in terms of uncertainty, in terms of which way to go? Like, what are you observing from a founder at the moment, or a CEO, for example?
Yeah, I don't think I see a lot of decision fatigue. I sometimes see uncertainty, and not everybody is, I think there's been a little bit of a shakeout. In our industry, I think 4, 5, 6 years ago, we had like an enormous boom with many, many new companies created, and it was very hard to find management. And so we had to also attract a lot of people who would kind of enter into the position as CEO as a first timer, which again, it's normal, and nobody gets born as a second time CEO. That's kind of impossible. So
Yeah.
everybody has to kind of receive the opportunity one day to kind of go through that journey. But then also, I think it's becoming clear that not everybody is fit for that. A lot of people desire or think they want to be a CEO, but it's hard to know what it truly is until you get there. So I have seen a number of people that had a hard time to kind of live up to expectations, or just to kind of face reality of being a CEO, of the loneliness of all of that. And I think that's something I've seen where, you know, they take decisions, but not always the right ones, where, and that's fine, but real decision fatigue I haven't seen. But I think it's, as always, when the going gets tough, the tough gets going. I think we've seen a kind of the number of companies kind of disappearing. Not everything in our business can be successful. That's just, how it is. It's complex biology. The chance, or the likelihood that you fail is much higher than the likelihood that you succeed.
Yeah.
And I think we're back to a more normal number of companies. Also, investors, in this uncertain climate, are more concentrating investments. So, which is also not always a good thing, but okay, it's what is happening, which means now we have more people available for the job, and certainly there you see the stronger leaders survive. So
Yes.
a little bit of a different answer to your question, a little bit of a different way of looking at it, but we've seen more mature leaders emerge now, more people that kind of have gotten,
Comes on the
Pocked and
board.
Maisel through the years, exactly, through a tougher time. And, we've been a little bit in a downturn, economically, macroeconomically, but certainly in biotech. It's been a tough couple of years. Financing was hard to find, exits were limited. Pharma companies were not buying companies anymore. They were focused, more on what is happening with the tariffs, what is happening with, pricing in our industry. And so they were not looking at innovation as hard anymore as they used to be. It's all coming back now, and it's always, everything goes in cycles, but that has really led to a little bit of a change. And I think this is where I now see stronger leaders step up, and those leaders, certainly are able and capable to decide. And the ones that weren't able to do that were facing, is it decision fatigue, or is it decision uncertainty, or is it doubt? I don't know. They kind of, unfortunately, got I don't know the right word to use here, kind of, have moved back into other positions, which is sometimes not bad. Not everybody, there's a lot of people that desire to be a CEO, but not everybody is cut out to be a CEO. And I think in every CEO interview that I do, I ask people, are you sure you want to be a CEO? Help me understand why that you want to do that, because, it definitely
Generally a
isn't
pretty
as
shitty job. It's generally because you're
exactly.
constantly, I mean, when I was in it, you just constantly, all you're doing is putting out spot fires. Like, a lot of people think it's a glory, it's the title, it's the role. You're literally day in, day out. You talk about getting out of bed and getting up. The minute you get up, then you look, if you check your phone, there's something that's happened, or there's a fire to put out. It's here, it's there, it is constant. And you called out lonely twice. And I really understand that, because I think it's, like, there's, who do you trust? And I'm not suggesting that's being paranoid or anything like that. You have the weight of on your shoulders. And I've had a couple of conversations on my pod where it's like, they've said to me, it's not a lonely role. And I'm like, my experience was, it was lonely, because ultimately, yeah, you're having to make all these decisions, and it's the decisions of, the business moving forward. And especially when you talk about in, times of downturn, decisions have to be made on the fly at times, and it's uncertain. And so you're navigating your way through this uncertainty. And some days I was like, I have no idea if this is the right response, like right, decision. My intuition is telling me it is. So I'm going to go with my intuition. I've looked at all the stats. I shouldn't say stats, but everything around me. This is what I'm going to do. And did I always make the right decisions? Not always. When it came to the big decisions, generally, yes. There were times when I did, and then, then it's like being, in politics. You're either loved, or you're, the world's worst person for the day, or whatever, for that very moment. And that's, when you talk about strength as well, I think that having yeah, anyway, I'll let you keep talking because I could just keep going on about this topic because I just generally don't think we talk about it enough.
No, but I think it's fair, and I think the learning I had is that when I became CEO of Tusk, I negotiated with the investor at that moment to be able to bring in enough independent directors, people with experience, people that had been CEO or had seasoned positions across the industry, and they would not be representing an investor; they would just be there as independent to do whatever is best for the company. They were kind of real good sounding boards to me. Two of them had lived through CEO experiences, had seen the good, the bad, and the ugly of being a CEO. And to me, that was like a little bit of a different discussion, because if it's a board director who's kind of there on behalf of the venture firm that has invested into your company, obviously you're I'm not going to say playing, you're at least working with their money, not with your
Mm.
money. So there's always a little bit of a different element to that. If it's an independent, he or she is truly there to share his or her experience and to kind of help you grow as a CEO or as a manager. So having enough trusted independent directors, I think, is the best advice I can give any CEO. And I think it's also the advice or how I kind of try to deal being a VC when we syndicate is in the board foresee enough room for independent directors and not kind of let your ego play out as an investor where everybody wants to have a board seat when they put a little bit of money and it becomes a very emotional, sensitive discussion. Whereas I think ultimately we should do this for the benefit of the company, which ultimately will be for the benefit of the patients. And there's sometimes, let's just be honest, a very seasoned independent can add more value than a VC director.
Yeah, it's so true.
I'll probably not be popular when my VC colleagues hear this, but okay, it is what it is.
No,
That's
I
what I
like the
truly
way
think, and that's how I feel about it.
yeah, I like the way you call out a spade a spade. Tell us a little bit about, tell a bit more about I guess, your Droya's venture as a specialist in life sciences. And I'm going to ask you that specifically in terms of you're investing in breakthrough therapies for oncology and genetic diseases, and you talk around, the impact and getting to the patient. The other part to this question is females within the specialist life science and from a CEO perspective, is there, because within what I'm seeing and what I'm understanding more and more is from a founder and females seeking funding, there's a real gap as well. And so I guess my question, there's two questions there around, tell us a little more about the specialist life sciences, and then I want to come back to the women piece as well, and knowing you've got two daughters also, and get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I can start actually with the latter, and again, yes, there's probably still an historical gap. I do see a lot of, more female executives kind of stand up. If I think we would I've never done the stats because, to me, I honestly, I'm very neutral. I don't care
Yeah, good.
whether they're male,
Yeah,
female, I want the right person for the job. And sometimes it even frustrates me in certain public boards where, you have to have a quorum of male or female, that
yes.
sometimes I can't take the right person because the quorum doesn't kind of fit. So I'm a little bit annoyed with all of that because
Yeah,
I'm really honestly kind of, I couldn't care less whether you're male or
yeah.
female. If I feel, but I think, obviously it has taken a while, and I think I fully support and understand why Quora were kind of fit in. I think we've seen a change. I think also if you look at in the biotech, there's a biotech sisterhood. There's like a lot of female CEOs who started supporting themselves. And I think if we would do the comparison to 5 years ago, there's been huge advancements made. I've never looked at an investment dossier and looked at it, oh, it's a female CEO or a female founder. I'm going to look at it differently. I can honestly say I've never ever even crossed my mind because I just don't care. Obviously, it's easier if you would have somebody who's done it twice or three times. And probably 5, 10 years ago, there weren't as many kind of females in that position. So then I might have picked also a male over a female, not because of sex differences, but mostly because of experience
Yeah,
differences, which
that's
was
fair.
also a hard reality. So you're a
Yeah,
little bit in a catch up mode, but in general, I have the feeling in our industry that distinction is kind of getting more vague. That there's more females that have been successful and that doing well. And so I'm not, I'm really not that busy with it. Maybe easy because I'm male and I don't notice it that much, and I'm maybe a little bit sensitive about it. Maybe yes, but at least I can only state that I, generally try to not let that impact or not let that affect any of my decisions. And I have the feeling that that's the same with a lot of my colleagues. So hopefully, the cards have been turned for the better. I think there's still a lot of catch up to do, but obviously you can't catch up 20, 30, 40, 50 years of history in 5 years. That's just also not impossible.
No. Absolutely. You just said something that I really loved. You said, I'm not that busy with it. And I'm like, we constantly talk about busy being busy, right? I always say to people, like, stop being busy, like you're busy being busy. And it's like, I really loved that term you just used because it's such a great one, because the word busy is such BS in terms of whenever anyone says busy, it's like, what are you being busy about? And I just, for all the listeners out there, I think everyone should borrow that. You're not that busy with it. Take out the drama, subtract, don't even focus on it, because it's not even worth focusing on. And that's ultimately what you're saying there. It's back
and
to...
that's in a lot of cases the thing. I think there's also a lot of debate about people and titles, and yes, that's important. But I'm always like, just do the job. You'll get
Yes.
recognition at the right time. And I think sometimes people are too focused on job title or anything else.
Agree.
I think, you got to be there not for the job title. You got to be there because you really want to contribute to something. You like what you do. Some things I always say is like, you spend probably more time in your, active life between 20 and 60 or 70, whatever the age will be, on the job, as much as that you spend at home or with friends or with family or even with your wife. So you better enjoy it. So
Yes.
And of course, not everybody has the luxury to be in such a position. Sometimes you got to do what you got to do, and not everybody has choices and options. I agree. But if you're in the lucky position that you have some choices, that you have some options, just do something you enjoy. And as you said, just quit the drama and get it done. And probably the advantage a little bit of getting older, that you kind of can take a step back. And I'm sure that when I was 30, I probably was as concerned as anybody else about a title or about a promotion. But I think, I hope I've always seen it in the right perspective, but I certainly do now.
Yeah, it's so true. I think the older you get, the wiser you become. Like, I know that I'm 48 and I've certainly become a lot wiser. And there's so many things that are nowhere near as important as I thought they were. And, the segue you just made to, let's get into a little bit about specialist life sciences. And you've called out the patient, and, you said you get out of bed every morning, whether it's rain, rain, hail or shine, I say, we say here in Australia, probably say the same thing, right? Because you know that you're actually making impact. And by the sounds of things, it's pioneering a future where, breakthrough therapies for oncology and genetic diseases, that specifically I call that out. I'm sure. What are the sorts of, what are the sorts of breakthrough therapies that you're investing in, and you can share?
No, absolutely. I think we work across, a lot of indications. Oncology is clear. We've made tremendous progress over the last, 10, 15, 20 years, whereas it used to be a death sentence probably, 20, 30 years ago. Now there's already a lot of cancers we can kind of give you a fair chance or a very good chance at survival of a normal life thereafter. But still, not everything is solved. There's still, still way too many tumors out there that kind of kill people that, relapse and all of that. So I think there's still a lot of work to be done. And I think that's something we focus on, because not only do you want to kind of just extend life, you really want to kind of extend survival and maintain quality of life. And I think we're really starting to understand more and more about what is the true cause of it. And also, we used to say, if you would have a tumor in your head or your neck, it would be head and neck cancer. But you have a tumor in your breast, it would be breast cancer. And your kidney, it would be kidney cancer. Well, I think that's where the tumor originates. I think we now start to understand that not all breast cancers are the same, not all head and neck cancers. And so better understanding what the true cause is gives us a lot more optionality kind of to have tailored therapies for, regardless of where the tumor kind of is. It gives you much more chance. And so this precision oncology, as they call it, is, I think, a next wave, a next step. And that's going to be something that we feel, strong about and we try to look at. But unfortunately, there's only one good model. You have an idea, you think about it in cells, and then you test it in, sometimes even in a couple of animal models. But you only know once you start treating patients. And so that's tough. And you have to be balanced because you don't want to make life worse. And there's always a risk that you have some side effects. So you have to be careful. It's slow, and you only know once you get to the patient. So, but I believe in precision oncology. I believe, with everything we've learned over the last years, that we know much better what the root cause is. And if you know what the root cause of a disease is, you can kind of have a better chance of really fixing the problem. And that, is a good segue into genetic disease. It's, we work on Alzheimer, we work on ALS, we work on Huntington disease, but also some very, very rare, ultra rare diseases like Pitt-Hopkins, or some very rare genetic epilepsy forms that babies, kids can suffer from. And also there, by now, we really start to understand what causes all these symptoms. And not only do we want to kind of get rid of the symptoms or treat the symptoms, which was the old way of doing things. I think we're now kind of digging in and trying to fix the genetic cause of the disease. And hopefully then that leads to a, cure. And a cure is a big word, or a stop of the progression of the disease. It's going to take a while, but if I look at where we are now versus many years ago, I think we've made tremendous work. And one of the examples I often give is, I've worked in Duchenne muscular dystrophy in 2008. I think I started there. I think the company started a little bit earlier, but in those early days, nobody was interested in, working on Duchenne. It was a rare disease. Not that many boys were affected with it. It was very debilitating, and it was very, hard on patients and families, but it was like, not a quote unquote commercial opportunity. And the only people that were willing to...
Sorry, Luke, can you just explain to listeners what the actual disease is? Because it is quite a rare one. And I know what it is. Yeah, I'd love if you could share.
No, I'm happy. Just very simple. It's it's only boys that have it. And it's kind of, they miss, I always say, the muscle, the shock absorber for their muscles. So the more they start using their muscles, their muscle will go to waste. Typically when the kids are, between, I would say, 8 and 12, they end up in a wheelchair, as of their late support and symptom kind of helping, symptom relief medication, we've already pushed them and gave them a better life for a longer time, but there's not a cure yet. So it's a very, very bad disease that not only impacts the patients, but also everybody around it. Because if you're a parent, at a certain moment, you want your kids to be independent. Well, not that easy. And again, there's Duchenne patients that can live independently, that have, really matured into, very impressive individuals, luckily enough, but it's still a very bad disease. And so, but it's not that many patients, that are affected by it, luckily. But if you're impacted by it, it's huge. And so when I started working on that disease, it was very hard to find any funding. So it was parents that kind of did fundraisers, patient organizations. And so we were amongst one of the first companies that, attracted real investor money, that made a large partnership, could convince a large pharma company to kind of work with us on that medicine. And so by now, I think there's a lot of companies active in Duchenne. It's become, a interesting disease also from an investor perspective. We took the company public. There was a competitor that took a company public. So a lot of money flowed into the disease research, which I think is great. Even if, my drug ultimately didn't make it to patients, I still think it worked, and maybe it failed for the wrong reasons, but nevertheless, we were the first ones, and it really has attracted a lot of research money. So I think overall it's for the greater good of the whole patient community that still today, there's a few drugs on the market. There's not yet a miracle drug because it takes a while, but there's activity, there's people working on it. There's every day new progress that is being made. And so hopefully one day, same as with cancer, or a number of cancers, we can kind of stop the disease and kind of really, really kind of give patients and families a better chance at a quote unquote normal life. And I think that is what is very fulfilling. And this is just one example of the things we try to do. And obviously, one day as an investor, you hope to make a return as well. That's,
Yeah.
let's not be shy about it. It's not,
No.
but I had the luck, I was inspired by Henry Termeer, who was the former, CEO of Genzyme, who unfortunately passed away a few years ago. But he always, he was one of the pioneers in these rare diseases who made a successful business model out of it. But he always said, look, if there's a hard decision to be made, let's think about the patients, because ultimately, if it's good for the patient, it's going to be good for the company. If it's good for the company, it's going to be good for the shareholders, and there's going to be a return. So at every difficult decision to make, let's think about what it means to the patient. I think it's something that stuck with me, that still inspires me today, and that I try to kind of keep as a central theme, when I look at investment decisions, when I look at hard decisions in companies, So yeah, I think this is, a lot of people claim that, but I think also a lot of people in my business are still doing this just because they're generally convinced that that is the only way why they, how you can make progress, how you can kind of remain honest. And yeah, that's important. And, it's what still drives me on an
I love
everyday
it.
basis.
Like, it's so refreshing to hear it, because from the outside in, you could, you could argue that it's all around the profit. It's all around, and a lot of businesses still today, it is around profit first, forget it, everything else comes second. But what you're talking about here is, it's patient, do something good. For me, that's where the profitability, the success follows. It's like they can go hand in hand, and
Yeah.
ultimately
And they have to go hand in hand, because
100%.
if there would never be a profit, then it also
Wouldn't be able to
wouldn't be
find
good, because
QS.
then
Yeah.
then it would kind of all dry up. There would be no money left or no money available to kind of keep doing it, because also there's a lot of money that is invested that kind of, it never goes to waste, because you learn from every experiment. But as I said, the likelihood that you're not successful is much higher, because it's complex biology. Man is a very, very complex species. And so, it's a tough business. It's a tough
Yeah.
business. And so if you then ultimately get there, I think there should be a return that also covers up for the failures that you have. And so I think that's something that people underestimate. But it's, we talked about conscious and impact capital. That's also what I told the investors in the fund, just for the return, you shouldn't kind of do this. If you only care about money, you shouldn't do this.
Totally.
In general, we hope to give you a good return on your money. That's absolutely the plan. That's absolutely the goal. And I think it's absolutely feasible and possible. Otherwise, I wouldn't be kind of pitching this to you. But the one thing I can guarantee you is that every money will be used to really kind of try to make new medicines for patients that are in need. And so as a minimum, it's going to have an impact. Maybe it's not our project that succeeds, but thanks to our project, maybe the next one proceeds. And that's
Yes.
not good for you as an investor, but as a human being, that's fantastic, because it brings us one step closer to hopefully a solution for another terrible disease. And I think that's the way how we should look at this. And again, obviously my LPs will, prefer to hear, but it's going to be our companies that are going to be successful, and we're the ones that are going to make a
Yes.
great return. And yes, obviously that's what I'll try to do. But yeah, that shouldn't be the main driver, because to be
No.
honest, then if it would just be for the money, I would do, I won't be able to do this much longer. Then I would just, probably sit at the beach or do something
Yeah,
something
totally.
else. I
Yeah.
would say with the grandkids, but I don't have them yet, luckily
No.
enough.
Well, in time you will. So yeah, I've got a couple of final questions for you. And what a
Sure.
such an amazing response. And just yeah, kudos to you, because we need more people like you in the world that, that are actually, I love hearing that the two and two, must come hand in hand. And I'm all about that. And I think that the future of business, the future of even from a VC perspective, we need to start to focus on this, like not just one or the other, right? Like it's so important. And I just think that it's a conversation that we need to be having more of because, specialist life sciences, like its impact directly to the patient, other industries, other sectors, very different. But ultimately, and at the end of the day, it's that meaning, it's that purpose in what you're doing, whether, it doesn't matter what role you're playing in any business, it should be impactful and it should be making a difference and making something better for the planet, for society, for humanity. Do you know what I mean? Like, I know I'm sounding I'm not trying to sound grandiose here. I just think that that's what we should be focusing on.
No, but I think there's many things where you can have an impact, and
yeah,
so I think, yes, it's hard to define, but even sometimes, a great new drink can be very impactful because we
totally.
also need
Yeah,
to enjoy something from time to time. So I think there's different gradations on it, but I agree with you. I think everybody should try to kind of get out of bed and do their job, trying to make some kind of an impact, whatever it is. I agree with that
yeah.
wholeheartedly.
Yeah, I'll have to send you a link to this book. Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, he's the godfather of flow state, and it's all around feeling and performing at your best. And he's got this great book called Good Business. And he wrote it back in the 90s. And I mean, he's passed away since then. Fascinating book. And it's everything you're talking about. And it just feels so relevant for today. So I will send you a link to it. And there's another one called
Appreciate that.
Soul of a firm, and it talks around the soul of a firm, of a business. And soul can sound somewhat woo woo. This was written, I think it was around the same time, and it's just like, it's so relevant. Was written like 20 years ago, and it's so relevant for today and where we're heading. So I'll send you the links and I'll put them in the show notes for listeners as well. Last two questions. I'll come to the last one relating to family, etc. in a second. It's been around for what? It was first established in the 50s, 60s, and a lot of people probably don't realize that because I think it was only created yesterday. But machines have been around for forever, yeah. And so there's been obviously, a lot that's been, I guess, developed over the years. And obviously it's, we're in this huge revolution at the moment. How much more is AI now impacting and, I guess, speeding up the ability to find cures, more clinical trials, etc. in the specialist life sciences? Are you seeing an I guess a acceleration, more than ever right now, or is it pretty much been the same in the last few years?
I think it's
Even more of an acceleration coming through.
I think it's early days to kind of make a judgment on that. I think we start to integrate AI more and more in the drug discovery, in the clinical trial process, and I'm sure it's going to have some added value. I can't judge at this moment what it truly brought to the table. I think
Yeah.
also still the people element remains important, the
Yes.
gut feeling and the,
Yes.
but are we able, already with not even only just AI, but just the availability to process more data, to
Mm.
generate more data, that we start to understand things much better? And can AI play a key role in there, which will hopefully be a fantastic tool for us that will kind of give us a higher chance on success and hopefully accelerate drug development? Yes, but have I seen the results yet? I think it's a bit too early. I think we're starting to integrate it into our thinking these days, but as drug development is a process of many, many years, and sometimes you can't go faster than you go. A human being where you ultimately have to test the experiment in the disease progression, they're not going to be impacted. So you still ultimately have to get there and then kind of do the long-term experiment to see. And then in hindsight, you can kind of do the analysis whether it truly kind of is better with than we had before. I'm hopeful, yes, it will help to shave up. Sometimes it will help to kind of improve the success rate. So once we kind of get to the patient and do the experiment, that the clinical trial fails will kind of go down. But have I seen that already? Then the answer is still no. So
No.
hopeful, yes, it will have an
Yeah.
impact. Is it proven yet? Not yet.
You're probably going, B, you're like asking me to look into a crystal ball. And it's like, that's a really, like, I can't look into the crystal ball sort of thing. Okay, last question for you. You work in such, I guess, for me, emotional, and I'm not suggesting you're emotional, that you're working directly with the patient, right? And it's some of this is, like it's life. It's called life science for a reason, right? And specialist life sciences. It must be taxing on you at times. And then you've obviously got your family, and you said you've been successfully married now for 26 years. How do you I guess, and I don't believe in the word balance. I just don't think you can separate life and business. You might argue differently with me. I think it's life workflow in terms of it's integrated, and, there's ways around it. How do you switch off? How do you enable yourself when you go home to your family to not carry, like, if you've had a really, shitty day, if you like, or, something's impacted and it hasn't gone to plan? What's your way
Yeah.
of being able to switch off and then,
I think I'm lucky, and it's not really an advice I can give. I got a phenomenal on and off switch. I can go from, on and off, and I can put things pretty in a certain box. So obviously when there's something, not going well in a trial, you're very disappointed. But on the other end, if then the next moment there's something good at home, or I had a failed phase 3 where I had to inform patients, worst day probably business-wise of my life. But when you go home and then you have to help the kids with homework, you just do it and it's okay. And I could kind of always put that on and off, and you give it your best, and you're grateful every day, one, that you can try to help somebody out there. But secondly, as long as you're healthy, happy, don't overcomplicate things. Just
yeah,
enjoy the good days, and I
yeah, I like
enjoy the
that.
good moments. And there's always going to be bad moments, but enjoy the good ones. And just don't, as we said before, don't be busy with being busy about things that don't matter.
There's a book in that. I keep saying to people like you with such great lived experience and so much, yeah, and you have such an incredible story and career journey, and then just calling out those, oh my gosh, not that busy with it. There's something in that title as well. There's just a whole story, a book around that for leaders, and because we just lose sight sometimes. And like,
It's just my 2 cents. People can, there's a few learnings I think people can benefit from, but it's every experience is different. Every person is different. So I'm happy to share my 2 cents, I always say, but it's just that, my 2 cents.
yeah, I love it. Well, you've certainly been great, and I've really taken some of your 2 cents with me, and I'll be taking them on my continued journey as a founder. So, Luke, thank you so much for coming on the show. How do we find out more about you? How do we find out more about Droia Ventures? Did I get that right? I think I've just
I
lost.
think, yes, we got the website. I can be found on LinkedIn. I think you have it, and then
Yes, I
very
do.
approachable. If people have questions, I'm sure they can find a way to get to me, and I'll try to be not too busy to make time to answer if they kind of reach out.
Thank you, Luke. You have a wonderful day, and I hope the sun keeps shining for you for the rest of the day and the rest of the week, actually. So I'm sending all the sunshine vibes your way from here in Melbourne, Australia, because
I
we've got.
appreciate that. Have a
Enjoy
good
your
night.
day.
Thank you for having me on the show, and have a good night. And
Thanks, Luke.
thanks a lot, and thanks for everybody who is taking the time to listen to this.
Yeah, no, thank you, listeners. Yes, thank you.
Cheers.
Thanks, Luke. I appreciate that. And yeah, great.
My pleasure.